Hey there everyone, do without wilt shall be the whole of the law. I'm Lexi Eve, and welcome back to another video on Libra Magick Book 4. Today is part 2, chapter 3, and it's going to be all about the altar. Get ready to enjoy. So, let me begin by saying that in this chapter of Libra Crowley is talking about a specific altar, the double cube for Hermetic high magic. I will begin by speaking exclusively upon this type, and after, I will discuss other types of altars and their import. Crowley's altar of Libra is, like I said, double squared, or double cubed, and has 10 faces, each with a specific painting or engraving. Crowley informs us right off the bat that, quote, "The altar represents the solid basis of the work, the fixed will of the magician, and the law under which he works. Within this altar, everything is kept, since everything is subject to law, except the lamp which hangs above." End quote. And also, quote, "The altar represents the extension of will. Will is the dyad." End quote. The dyad is the number 2 by Pythagorean numerology. You may need a refresher on the formula of 0 equals 2 and how this ties into the concept of will. If so, you might want to do a Google search or search online after this lecture, but also note that I hope to put up a video on that subject in the very near future. Crowley's altar should be, quote, "made of oak to represent the stubbornness and rigidity of law. Others would make it of acacia, the symbol of resurrection. In 777, oak and acacia correspond with Tiferet." End quote. Just a quick note, I didn't write this down in my script, but acacia, I believe, I read it somewhere, is the burning bush that spoke to Moses, or God spoke through Moses, through a burning bush made of acacia, and also the thorns on the crown of thorns that Jesus had upon his head was acacia also, so it's very tied in with solar symbolism. The 10 faces of the cube represent the 10 Sephiroth, the top surface being Kether, the bottom Malkuth. So, the 3 most important Sephiroth regarding the altar are all found in the middle pillar. Again, that is the Sun, Kether, and Malkuth. All middle pillar. Kether is in Malkuth, so these 2 spheres are generally always very connected with each other, especially regarding the physical world, the kingdom. Combined with the fact that the wood it is made from is attributed to the Sun, Tiferet, I am reminded of the Ace of Discs. From the Thoth Tarot pamphlet, quote, "For Crowley, the Ace of Discs was an affirmation of the identity of sun and earth, spirit and flesh." End quote. So you might want to meditate upon that tarot card in regards to the altar. Then, to our chapter 3 of Libra or back to our chapter 3, quote, "The altar is connected with the Ark of the Covenant, Noah's Ark, the Nave, and many other symbols of antiquity." End quote. On height and shape, the altar should be square, but aside from that, it should be as tall as the navel of the magician. And what drawings are upon each face are left to the magician. Crowley's altar, as depicted, had the Vitruvian man on top, with the Nokiana elemental imagery all around on the other faces, but these can be changed. Symbols very personal and containing some kind of personal occult meaning may be used, as well as sacred geometry. There are a ton of clustered symbols mentioned about the altar so far. It is a very profound symbol in and of itself, with a lot of complexities. It corresponds with the magician who is spirit-bound in flesh, thus bound by nature and law, be that law Thelema, the Tao, or some other. If one is a Thelemite, they accept the book of the law, and this altar, which is also a cabinet, should hold within it the tools of the magician, their sacred text, and then their sacred law should be reflected in the altar's outward appearance. If they are a Gnostic Christian, rosy cross symbolism is best. A Buddhist occultist, then symbolism aligned with Tripitaka should be emphasized. A Taoist, obviously the Tao Te and the Yin-Yang symbolism would be employed upon the altar in its physical appearance. Regardless, the altar is a symbol of reincarnation, life everlasting, and then therefore it has an alchemical connection to the elixir of life. Identification of the higher self with the altar should be taken into account on your own time. The tools the altar holds are symbols of various aspects of the magician in their quest for union. Keep in mind the altar and what it holds is also within you. Perhaps what I'm trying to say is that Dharana upon the altar, its appearance and storage items will go a long way. All your work performed on the altar is truly just an emphasis of the great work internally. Your work upon it in your temple will reflect in your life in the world of your everyday life. Past all of this, the altar is so much more than just a symbol or a workstation. It is quite literally the magician's direct line of communication with the divine. It symbolizes soul and earth as the magician is spirit and flesh. The altar is very much a means for communication. I personally go as far in most cases to look upon it as my telephone line to divinity. Over the years, I have used many altars for different purposes. When I had a personal temple devoted to an angelic initiatory order in Brooklyn, my main altar included the Stele 666 with the Book of the Law in the northeast corner of the temple, with many of my consecrated magical weapons, wand, dagger, bell, oil, etc., and images of Baphomet, Tomega, Therion, and a selection from the Egyptian Book of the Dead, all surrounding it. I have had an Enochian temple around that time as well, but the details on that table, the ensign, sigillum Dei Amet, and watchtowers are too complex to go into here. I still have up in my new home today an altar for Bastet, the Egyptian goddess of cats, which I took an oath that I would always keep up when I worked with her in my old temple and consecrated her altar, used primarily in my workings with her for Libra Altar. And then there have been other less permanent altars that have come and gone over the years. I've had many altars for rituals I created in the OTO. I have an altar that I use for the congregation of the Lamp of Invisible Light. I once had a necromantic altar, and now have a small ancestral altar that has sprung up in recent years after several deaths of people very close to me. And then, I have used altars for various high magic ceremonies such as Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, and initiations into various magical orders. To go over every detail of each of these altars could take hours, so I will only be touching on points that intersect on using altars in general, as there are definitely guiding principles that rule the use of all of these altars simultaneously. I may pick out one or two examples though. Again, I look at an altar quite literally as a telephone. What is upon the altar is like dialing the phone number. Liber 777 and 776.5 are the best keys to not only creating ritual in which your altar will be used, but in many cases is the key to building the altar itself. Images, magical weapons, and candles in the appropriate colors are amongst the most common items on altars. The proper number of candles matters greatly in some cases. For example, in Liber 15, the Gnostic Mass, on the high altar are 22 candles arranged in a specific manner to represent the 22 paths on the Tree of Life, amongst other things. This is so because the temple of Liber 15 represents the entire Tree of Life, and the high altar is above the abyss. On this high altar, barring the Stele 666, there are no images or statues to be an idol for a deity that is worshipped, but that the priestess becomes a vessel of Nuit via the Ein Sof. She is quite literally the idol, through which the congregation interacts with the divine. This happens by consecration and magic using the 9th degree OTO formula, whereby the magical child is made on the astral via the union of priest and priestess, and it is guided, the magical child is guided, through consumption of the Eucharist. The priestess in Liber 15 as a vehicle for the divine light, through which others commune, is a universal principle in altars. One can commune with the deity through an altar that is for that specific deity, through the proper magic and supporting items on the altar. Liber Altar is a text for Bhakti Yoga, union through devotion, Bhakti Yoga. I had a specific Liber Altar altar to worship and communicate with Bastet, the Egyptian goddess of cats, as I have mentioned. Everything on the altar, and the rituals which use this altar, were all aimed at communication and union with Bastet by propping up her statue as an idol, which was absolutely central to communication, and literally central on the altar. Her statue was made holy with the surrounding written holy words, oils, a sistrum, which is sacred to her and I would use to play music, pictures, and small statues and figurines of cats, all played their part in attracting Bastet into the statue. I was able to invoke her and use the statue as a focal point to directly talk with her. The statue was consecrated many times with certain holy oils and semen I harvested through means of sex magic via a 6-degree formula of an angelic order I was leading. Magic of that sort, which would be nearly synonymous with the 8th degree OTO, though perhaps better as it was more convenient, certainly more simple, and way more adaptable. The more work I did with her altar, the clearer the line of communication became. This should basically go for any deity for which you set up an altar. The more it's used, the easier it becomes. Again, the intent of your rituals determine what should be on the altar. To give one more example, a necromantic or ancestral altar can have a few different purposes. This can range from helping a newly deceased person move on, celebrating the life of an ancestor, communing with someone you know who is either recently or long deceased, divination, and even enslaving the soul of a deceased enemy. This last one I mentioned for the sake of the subject, but do not recommend anyone perform, as it is completely unethical in most cases. For these kinds of altars, pictures, if possible, of the person when alive are very useful, as are their bodily remains, either bones or their cremation ashes. Past that, it depends on the purpose of the ritual and intent, as I've said many times. A mirror and or sigils may be useful if either is a medium that works well for you, bearing in mind that not everyone has the ability to scry with a mirror, but if magical mirrors work well for you, their position on this type of altar may be towards the center, so that all surrounding items and conjurations affect the mirror in such a way that the astral light is easily perceived through the mirror. Articles of clothing that the person wore are potential links to that person too. Also, you may have a personal connection to deities of death or the afterlife. If so, items that can invoke that deity might be something you would consider using. Now, aside from being a focal point, altars also function as a storage space. For my primary Thelemic altar depicted here, I set it up so that it symbolically represented the supernal triad. My cup was on the left for Bina, my wand on the right for Chachma, and the Book of the Law in the center top for Kether, with the stele 666 behind it to represent the veils above Kether. All of the rest of my magical weapons I just arranged as I felt were appropriate, and to me this reminded me of the Book of the Law, quote, "The other images group around me to support me. Let all be worshipped, for they shall cluster to exalt me." And that's a quote from Liber chapter 3, verse 22. Magicians store their consecrated, hermetic, magical weapons on and around their altar not for mere convenience, but also because it becomes a constant source of energy in the temple, linking the physical temple with the egregore of Thelema or their tradition, which simultaneously charges the weapons as well by receiving energy through an astral link to Boleskine. In my case, that's our Thelemic Mecca, or if you're from a different tradition, to your tradition's egregore, or to your deity, or what have you, whatever the altar is for. Now, keep in mind, when making an altar, there are many variables, as we've already gone over, that can truly make it more simple or complex. The type of wood or material it's made from, its dimensions, placement in the temple, and items that are going to go on or around it all come into play. The more intricate it is, the more factors will be working on neurons of your unconscious mind. And this is my closing point. Everything on the altar is symbolic of your nature. Generally speaking, as I will get into their respective chapters, the thurible is aspirations, the cup, your emotional depths, the wand, the direction of your will, the Book of the Law, of nature, internal and external, etc., etc. Just by gazing upon the altar, the weapons thereupon affect various parts of your psyche and unconscious realm. By physically interacting with the altar, even more so. I will soon be getting into chapters about all of the magical weapons, and will explain how they each are an extension of your being. But in closing this chapter, I just hope that I demonstrated well enough how the altar is the cubic stone upon which the temple is operated. Love is the law, love under will. Hope to see you in the next one.